Reiner, welcome back. I'm
Thank you.
happy to have you here. It's an honor. You are, meanwhile, you have become quite famous in the Netherlands. We have half an hour, and there are a few subjects I'd like to talk to you to get an update since last time. I think it was 2 months ago you were here. There's a few topics. This is the verdict in Weimar, the PCR case against Volksverpetster, the case in the United States, in Canada, and the situation in Germany. Let's start with the verdict in Weimar, because everybody in the Netherlands thought you did this case, but you commented it. So you became even more famous because of this case. Everybody knows your name now because of this. But can you tell us about this case and about its implications?
Yeah, this was a criminal case, and a judge in the town of Weimar, who through a colleague of his is connected with us. I'm in close touch with one of the colleagues of this judge in Weimar. He came to the conclusion, first you have to get the facts. The facts of the case is that I think 7 or 8 people gathered for a birthday party. And then the police came and arrested them all because they were celebrating a birthday. And the judge had, he took a close look at all the facts of the case. First at how dangerous is this virus, and then at how dangerous are the anti-corona measures. Now, his first approach came to the conclusion that we have never, because there's no excess mortality, and in the meantime, of course, we know that even the WHO agrees with januari that this is whatever it is, it's not worse than the common flu at 0.14. That's what the WHO says, or Ioannidis 0.26 percent infection fatality rate. So he says there's no excess mortality. This doesn't seem to be any more serious than the common flu. Now let's take a look at the core of what a pandemic is according to the German definition of what a pandemic is. And the German definition says, and I think it states in Article 28 or whatever of the infection protection law. It says that a epidemische Lage nationaler Tragweite, its core is that the healthcare system is either being overwhelmed or at risk of being overwhelmed. And he agrees that never, ever has that been the case throughout the entire pandemic. Then he looks at the other side and he says, what have the anti-corona measures done? And he says it's so horrendous. Many more people probably died because of the corona measures than would have ever died had the virus run its course. And the final assessment is that, I forget the precise quotation, I think it's horrendous mistakes were done by politicians, something like that. You probably know it better than I do. And this is extremely important because we're sharing this decision with all our colleagues in the United States and Canada, everywhere. They're all translating it because that's really what it boils down to. Of course, it's going to help if we have more decisions that tell us that PCR tests cannot tell you anything about infections, if we have more decisions that tell us that there is no asymptomatic infection. But this is going to the core of everything. It looks precisely at the question that's at the center of everything in this country, at least, most other countries as well. Has there ever been a danger of this healthcare system being overwhelmed by this pandemic? No.
But it's a big relief for me that there are still judges for whom facts matter, because we have seen a lot of judges so far and the facts were totally irrelevant, and they just said, well, the WHO says this, so this is the case. What are the implications? Because I heard that Merkel already, she mandated that this should be overruled, this verdict, and it should be from the table. She's of course used to these kind of things, because also she did the same thing in Turing, I believe, when somebody was voted there to prime minister, or what was his function.
Yeah.
What are going to be the implications? Are there going to be any?
The prosecution is appealing the judgment, and we're going to try and do our best to help to sustain the judgment by looking at all the attorneys who come into play as accomplished criminal lawyers. We have a couple. One of them is my friend Gerd Strate. He's the one who got, this is an infamous case, who got a man by the name of Gustl Mollat out of prison, or out of a psychiatric ward. Fantastic lawyer. I hope I can get him interested in this case so that he's going to hopefully represent this man. What Merkel is trying to do is, she has nothing to do with democracy. I don't think she even understands about democracy. She has a staunchly communistic background, and that's what she's trying to do right now, trying to turn this country and the rest of the world, because this is supposedly the role model for the rest of the world, trying to turn this into a fascist communist country. But more and more people are awakening to this. More and more people are beginning to ask questions, even those who have been in line with the government and who have now come under pressure, in particular, all those small and medium-sized businesses. They begin to realize that this is probably not about health. There's something else going on. And it looks, and more people are beginning to understand this, it looks as though this is a massive hostile takeover of all the small and medium-sized businesses at zero cost by fraudulent corporations, too big to fail corporations. First, they destroy the businesses, and then they take them over.
Yes, we share that view. Then the next case was against these so-called fact checkers from Volksverpetzer. So this was about the PCR test, and I said Wodak was a liar. I saw your interview with Punkt Preradovic. It was already removed from YouTube, I saw. What is the status of this case at this moment?
That's another really strange story. We filed this case in November already. We filed it against these so-called fact checkers. Of course, they have nothing to do with fact checking. You can buy these people and pay them to defame others, which is what they did with Wolfgang Wodak. That's why we filed this complaint for Wolfgang Wodak. And at the core of this is the PCR test. This complaint has not been served yet. It is normal that it takes 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most, for a complaint to be served to the defendant. But it hasn't been served yet. When we first realized there's something wrong, one of my colleagues called the court in Berlin, and they said, "Oh, unfortunately, we made a mistake. The court expenses that you paid in, they were booked in the wrong place, so we shut the file."
What a coincidence.
What a of course, it's not a mistake. Somebody's doing somebody's pulling some strings here. But at the same time, it tells us that they're really, really afraid of this complaint, or else they would just let it go through. So we're hoping that tomorrow, when my secretary is going to call again, that they're finally going to get their ass in gear.
Well, this is the same with the next case we will discuss. This is the claim in the States. This is, I think, personally against Mr. Osten. I think you don't call him anymore Drosten because he doesn't have a doctor's title. I heard that soon we can expect a provisional verdict. Can you tell
Yeah, but
something about that?
it's not against Drosten. It's a complaint that was filed by our friends from CHD, Children's Health Defense. That's the Kennedy group of attorneys. And our friend Ray Flores, a very accomplished, excellent attorney, he argued the case in court. Not the case itself, but rather they also made a motion for a preliminary judgment. And he argued that case, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And at first it looked as though the judge was much too much in line with the government, because he was stressing how dangerous this pandemic is, how dangerous this virus is, etc. But the longer Ray argued the case, the more of his arguments he explained to the judge that seemed to have turned his mood. And everybody who saw this, everybody who was a witness to this, agrees that this week, either today or tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we're going to get a judgment in our favor. So that is really, really good looking.
Okay, that will be important for us as well, because we are also appealing, and our case will be, the hearing will be the 15th of April. We try to get it to get it for sooner, but the court refuses that, and we believe that's a disgrace, because every month billions of euros of damage are being done with this test. So it's quite curious that I think the urgency is not there. Then the case in Canada. Can you tell about that one?
Yeah, that's the first real class action for damages, and that's the case that is going to that's the lawsuit that is going to become the international class action case. Our friend Michael Swinwood and his colleagues filed this case, at the core of which is the PCR test. But the interesting thing about this case is that he's going after the really deep pockets. Part of this complaint is a summary of how the power structures that we're dealing with, how these power structures have come into existence over the last couple of centuries. This is way too much for a German or an American complaint, but there, in that particular situation, it makes sense, because he starts out with his first group of plaintiffs being the natives, the Indians. Another group of plaintiffs is the entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses, and the third group of plaintiffs is handicapped people. I think there's more groups, and eventually this is going to be opened for every individual from anywhere in the world who suffered damages because of the Dresden test lockdown. And he filed it in such a way as to this is unusual for any complaint, I think even for a Canadian complaint, but this introduction of the historical background plus the defendants. He's suing not just Bill Gates or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he's also suing the Catholic Church. He's suing the House of Windsor, the British royalty, because all of these powerful entities, according to what he writes, have their puppets in the pharmaceutical and tech industries, which are trying to take over the world. I know this is a little too much for German or European standards, but I think in his particular case it makes sense, because he argues from history, and he argues that the first group of plaintiffs, the natives, have always been the subject of genocidal attempts. And to round this off, he says, it used to be cowboys and Indians. Now we're all Indians. We're all Indians, and we're all in danger of falling victim to genocide. So in that sense, it makes sense.
Yes, in that sense, the first SDG, we already realized that we are the same, yeah? We will all own nothing, and we will all have no rights. So in this way, we managed. Ryan, I know you are working day and night for many months already, and you are doing also the Corona Ausschuss. What is your feeling about the situation in Germany? Are you getting optimistic slowly, or is it too early for that?
No, I don't think it's too early. I think I've always been an optimistic person. I always see the light at the end of the tunnel. It may not be happening tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but on the other hand, it may, because many people are extremely angry, and many more people are beginning to ask questions. And I think that's what turns the tide. Once people decide that they're not just going to accept what they're told as a basic truth, but once they decide to ask questions about these orders, that's a really good start. One of the people who we heard on our Corona committee the last time is a professor of psychology. His name is Professor Lindner, and he explained that for a democracy to function, you need people who have moral competency. And it made a lot of sense to me, because he gave us a quote by Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, when he first tried to introduce democracy to the American people, was greeted by his own colleagues with disgust. They said, "Are you crazy? People are too stupid for this." And he said, "Well, that may be the case, but we have to educate them." And that's the point. This is something that has gone wrong, at least here in Germany, over the last 20 or 30 years. Our educational system is in shambles. People, and that's what moral competence is. It's basically two elements. You have to know and you have to learn how to ask questions and not just follow orders. And the second element is you have to be able to discuss different opinions rather than defame the other person because he has a different opinion, or even killing them.
Yeah, as well, I see a development in the media, that they are more and more becoming critical. I can tell you, in the Netherlands, we are far behind. They are still, I mean, the Netherlands, I think, will be the last one to be liberated. But can you tell you what are you seeing in the media in Germany?
Yes, even in the mainstream media, people are beginning, or that's what it looks like, are beginning to wake up. When my last video, the one that you just mentioned, the one with Milena Preradovic, when that was taken down, a bunch of the mainstream media all of a sudden noticed it. They were not necessarily in favor of what I said, but they noticed it. As far as this decision by the court in Weimar is concerned, everyone noticed it. And that's important, even if they don't agree with it. As long as it gets into the mainstream media, the people are finally beginning to see the other side of the story, because thus far they've only seen one side of the story. And that's what I, as a lawyer, I mean, all of us as lawyers know that you always have to look at the other side as well. Audiatur et altera pars. That's the old Roman quotation that I can always give. Everybody knows that. But here in Germany, in particular with this chancellor, it's been completely forgotten. The only person she ever listened to is Dresden, and the two chief lobbyists of the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the very same people who were present in May of 2019 when the CDU had this global health conference, something. They were there. Those who are now the most important advisors to our chancellor, and the very same people who then decided 8 months later, this happened in May of 2019, and then a little less than a year later, they decided we're going to have a pandemic.
Because on the other hand, you see the repression is in the next gear. I heard as well with your action in the gastro industry, where you are organizing political assemblies of. How do you explain this aggression now? Do you think it's a sign that they trying to keep in control and they feel they're losing it?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I think. Well, you know, and even that has taken a good turn. Our first attempt didn't work so well, because this is an attempt to open up a bar called the Scotch and Sofa bar in Berlin. And but our first attempt didn't go so well because the police came and broke the whole thing up. They didn't really know what to do. When they came into the bar, they were completely confused when we explained to them that there's at least 2 lawyers in the room, and that we enjoy special constitutional protection because we're in the process of founding a political party, which in Germany is afforded special constitutional protection through Article 21 of our Constitution. So they kind of didn't know what to do, but they eventually broke the whole thing up. The next, and also I think we made a mistake. We should have announced this beforehand and discussed the whole thing with the police. It's not the police. It's the people who ordered the police to come in. So the next time we spoke to the, this is last week, we spoke to the police beforehand, and we agreed on a hygiene concept. And they said, oh, of course we respect the Constitution. Of course you can found a party, as long as you stick to the rules. So that's what we did, and it went over really, really well. We're going to do it again on Thursday.
Great. Thank you for your explanation. Martina, maybe there are some listeners who have some questions. Martina, do you have questions?
Yes, I have some questions. Okay, what if a judge makes the restrictions illegal? What will be the next step? What will happen?
Well, we're going to have to make sure that this judgment becomes final. Thus far, it's not final because it can still be appealed. And that's what the prosecution announced. Now, when Jeroen said that Merkel ordered them to appeal the judgment, that is probably true. The thing is, in Germany, and that's what the European court decided a couple of years ago, in Germany, the prosecution is not at all independent, even less than in any other country. That's why we can't even, our German prosecutors cannot even issue international, what's the word again, for arresting, international arrest warrants, let alone enforce them, because there's always the chance that the prosecutor who does this is being influenced by someone like Merkel. So to answer your question, we're going to have to make sure that this judgment becomes final, and then Merkel will have to obey it. Everybody else too.
I really like that. Let's keep that in mind. Merkel has to obey. Okay, now the question. The 31st of January, there will be a big demonstration in Wien. And what do you think the impact will be?
I don't know what's going to happen then. I know that there are a lot of things that are being planned, and I know that there's lots of demonstrations that people want to hold, but this one I don't know anything about. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. What happened in Germany after the great demo in Berlin last summer? How are the people reacting? Are there more demonstrations coming up?
That very large one, which happened on August 29th, probably the largest one ever. Over 1 million people were there. Of course, the mainstream media said it's only 17,000. However, we've spoken to the police. There were 43 attorneys on the ground. We know it was, and I walked the entire distance of the group of people who had collected or gathered in at the Siegessäule, and then all the way back to where it started. It must have been way more than 1 million people. But that was a big boost for everyone. A lot of people decided they're going to do it themselves in other cities as well. But it's maybe it has to do with the weather. When the weather became bad and cold and snowy right now, and of course with the police using water cannons in this cold weather, that kind of discouraged a lot of people. But the weather is getting better, and more of this is going to happen. And I think more of this will be successful as well.
One question. I read in the media, I think it was that of the population in Germany, 94%, I think it was 94% of the people don't believe the narrative of the state anymore about Corona. You think this could be accurate?
I don't know if it's that many, but I know one thing. When they claim that 60% or even 75% of the people are in favor of vaccinations, that is definitely a lie. I know that the mainstream media propaganda is trying to tell us that that's the case. That is not true. I travel a lot on the trains, and of course you run into people who are complete idiots and jerks, but there's so many people. Some of them recognize me, some of them don't, and they ask me, do you have an exception? Do you have a medical condition so that you don't have to wear a mask? And then we get to talk, and sometimes you can see that these people are interested. And I always talk to them, sometimes for an hour or so. And in many cases, they get interested, they take my business card, and they get interested, and they check out the website of the Corona Ausschuss, the Corona Committee. So it always helps to talk to people in order to understand that the mainstream propaganda is a complete lie.
Thank you. Martina, last question. I think then, unfortunately, the time is over again.
Yes, okay. Well, about the PCR gate as well in Germany, when the decision is final, will it be an example for the rest of Europe or even more?
Oh, definitely, because that's what's going to bring the whole house of cards down. The only reason why people are panicking is because they believe these two lies that were spread by Dr. Austin, as I call him, because he's not a real doctor. One, there are asymptomatic infections, which is not true. The latest study was published, I think, in late December of 2020, and it included, I think, 400,000 people from Wuhan. And it shows that there are no asymptomatic infections. Now, even if there were, even Fauci agrees that asymptomatic infections do not play a role in this whole infectious disease concept. The second lie, of course, and this first lie is important because it makes everybody afraid of everybody. And up until then, up until Corona, of course, people who had no symptoms, who were asymptomatic, were healthy. All of a sudden, you have to be aware that maybe someone who is healthy or looks healthy, doesn't show any symptoms, is seriously ill and contagious. Not true. It's a lie. The other important piece is, of course, the PCR test, because that was the tool that Drosten and his pals used in order to imply that there's so many infectious people all over the world. Why? Because his test shows it. Now, his test, which everybody knows now is set at 45 cycles, doesn't show anything, because if you check at 30, at a cutoff of 35, you get at least 97% false positives. So if that comes down in a court decision, then the whole house of cards is going to collapse. And then we're going to turn to those who are responsible for this, and we're going to make them pay and go to jail.
I totally agree. We look forward for a tribunal for all the people who are responsible for this. So this is the light on the end of the tunnel. Let's make it this way. Thank you very much, Reiner. We hope to have you back in a while when there are new developments.